There's been too much sweetness and light around here lately. So, do you know who killed Tupac? It's fucking terrible. I've spent my entire life studying the dark side of US actions abroad and at home, and this story is just appalling. My prime source for this is the FBI war on Tupac Shakur. The thing to remember is that even when an intelligence agency carries out an assassination, there's still a bunch of bureaucrats. They do things in a similar way. So you look at the death of MLK Jr., you look at the death of Malcolm X, you look at how they shot JFK or his mistress, and it's following the same patterns over and over again. They have a certain way that they do things, and when you're the police, you don't have to be that good at covering your tracks. Once you realize you can shoot a sitting president and you don't really have to cover it up that much, you can get away with it. Of course, the oppression of black activists goes much farther back. W.E.B. Du Bois, the founder of the NAACP, was a target of constant harassment. They wouldn't give him his passport because he was too good at talking and go to Europe and fire up everybody against the U.S. policies. Of course, Marcus Garvey was a big target of U.S. and British intelligence, and they harassed him to death. Then this continued into the Civil Rights era. For Martin Luther King Jr., the FBI and CIA offered $1 million contract to the mob bosses of New York and Chicago, but they turned them down. When they finally did shoot him in the hotel, one thing you'll notice is the first person that got to his body was an underground informant. That's always one of the tactics. Someone there to make sure the job actually got done, make a hand signal to the other shooters that are usually sitting around, making sure that this worked. Then the Black Panthers arose, and nothing scared the FBI more than the Black Panthers. You hear a lot about the harassment of the white activists with COINTELPRO and infiltration and stuff. That was, when you look at the files, that was 10% of the FBI's energy. During the 60s, it was focused on black activists. By far, they were the ones getting the heat. And there were lots of engineered murders of Black Panthers. Then, of course, there's a tactic of creating front groups to cause division. For instance, the U.S. Slaves was a group that might have been an FBI front there to divide the black nationalist movement. Famously, the Chicago police shot Fred Hampton dead in his bed. And they had these intelligence programs in all the major cities, tracking Panthers, murdering Panthers, harassing them, getting them arrested on bogus charges. All of the classic techniques of COINTELPRO are being applied to Panthers all over the country to disrupt what was working really well. That was the problem, is they were effective. They were a socialist organization giving back to the communities, and they were black people with guns. Everything the U.S. hates. The reason the Panthers are so important is, for instance, the Panther 21 trial, one of those big tragicomic show trials, his mother was involved in all of this. She was a key Panther leader throughout this whole time. And so Tupac grew up in this spirit of activism. For me, I had no idea Tupac was such a genius from such a young age. He was acting by the age of 13. He was going to this magnate art school in Baltimore studying dance and Shakespeare and acting and writing. He founded an activist group that worked on anti-violence campaigns and AIDS prevention campaigns. I mean, he was apparently a glowing star from the very beginning. He apparently had an almost photographic memory as well, and in high school he was reading hundreds of books at the graduate school level and getting them into his political awareness of class in the United States. At 17, he was elected the youngest ever chairman of the New African Panther Party. And it was around this time in the mid-'80s that a lot of Panthers started calling themselves New Africans. That was the way of people saying it. If you want to learn more about that, Sanyika Shakur, who is formerly known as Monster Cody, has some great writing on how he came to the New African movement and what it means. I think his writing's really powerful. With all this notoriety, you can imagine what happens next. The police harassment begins. He stopped in Oakland in 1991, and the police beat the shit out of him for jaywalking and choke him until he's unconscious. He sues the city for $10 million, and he gets $15,000. Later on that year, there is a drive-by shooting outside the release of his first film, Juice, and many people suspect it was a hit orchestrated by the COINTELPRO ace, Richard Held. Luckily, no one was hit. So let's pause and see what Congress had to say when they were looking into what the FBI was doing with these COINTEL programs. Here's what they instructed agents to do who were doing this. Against political musicians, show them as depraved person. Call attention to their habits and living conditions. Explore every possible embarrassment. Send in women and sex to break up marriages. Have them arrested on marijuana charges. Start personal conflicts and animosities between them. Send articles to newspapers showing their depravity. Use narcotics and free sex to entrap them. Use misinformation to confuse and disrupt them. Get records of their bank accounts. Get specimens of their handwriting. Provoke target groups into rivalries that may result in death. They used all of this against Tupac and against many other political musicians who were trying to make a difference. Of course, the backdrop of all this was the giant war between the Blood and the Crips, which was certainly engineered by the FBI. They wanted that to happen. But by April of 92, the Black Panthers were working to organize a truce between the largest chapters of the Bloods and the Crips. It was working. It was ending this black-on-black violence to work together to end the system that was destroying black lives in the United States. So it was around now in the early 90s with the Blood and Crip truce happening. The people working around Tupac and his mother came up with the idea of the thug life movement. They wanted Tupac to take on the persona of a gangsta and be a rapper, and he wasn't really that. He was a sensitive young artist soul, but he knew this was the way to appeal to young gang members and try to get them to abide by certain codes that would decrease black victimization. And so you had really important people in the movement like Bell Hooks and Daniel Smith coming out and saying how uplifting, pro-choice, and anti-abuse the lyrics of his first 3 albums were. I mean, he saw this as the best way he could use his genius to make a difference. Of course, this is when Reagan and Bush privatized national security inside the U.S. and allowed people that weren't U.S. intelligence operators to carry out operations in the U.S. and not report it to National Security Council. So basically, just like they deregulated finance, they deregulated U.S. intelligence and allowed all these even shoddier actors in the CIA and FBI to operate. So all of Tupac's popularity brought on this heat. As he said, I never had a record until I made a record. The power that came to him from his increased fame also brought on a lot more police attacks. In Atlanta, the police shoot at him in an incident that appeared to be engineered. In New York, the infamous street crimes unit seems like they tried to engineer another shooting that luckily didn't work. And let's think about how Tupac's music was getting out into the world. There is a long history of the CIA trying to take over cultural organizations. And in the case of music, there's a long history of them using the mob, who is always their buddies, for carrying out jobs like this, to control the music industry and the studios. And that was certainly going on in rap music. And so it seems like the famous rap label Death Row Records, it was funded hugely by Time Warner and has links to both U.S. intelligence and the mafia. I know it's one you always hear great things about, but it could be that is a front as much as the Paris Review was a front. In addition, the FBI started to foment what became as the East-West rapper war. They sent fake letters from imprisoned New York Panthers to each other, passed on false information to Huey Newton and the New York Panther 21. They used everything they could in journalism and dirty tactics to create a war between these rappers. Then they used this feud to simply shoot people, because they could shoot them and say it was some rapper that did it. And it seemed like they did that a lot. For instance, a LA cop found solid evidence linking the LAPD working with Death Row Record employees to orchestrate the murder of Biggie Smalls. Over and over again, Death Row guards attacked people like Snoop Dogg or got other people in trouble and got them arrested. So by June of 96, he's 25. God, he was young. And he was a megastar. He had just released his first Death Row album, All Eyes on Me, which was a double CD that made $10 million in sales, and it was the highest week sales ever, besides the Beatles anthology. And he was making so much money, and he was plowing that money back into activism and the Panthers and all these things that the U.S. intelligence hated. He had just finished his 3 CD contract for Death Row, and after a dispute about the amount of money he was supposed to be getting, he fired his Death Row lawyer, which pretty much signaled that he was leaving. 10 days after that, he was supposed to go to Mike Tyson's fight in Vegas, but he was wary about it. It didn't feel right. Vegas is mob territory. He didn't like the event's timing or the locale. There's a long history of the U.S. working with the mob to do its dirty business. Despite those worries, he decided to go because he actually had a benefit concert the next day. This is a great part of the story. He got busted for weed possession, and the elderly white judge read his life story and loved him so much, called him a remarkable young man, and the only thing he sentenced him to was to do a benefit concert, which pissed off the district attorney so much. So he decided to go to the fight and see his friend Mike Tyson so he could do the benefit concert. But the day before the fight, they fired one of his 2 bodyguards. And the day of the fight, they told the other bodyguard that he wasn't allowed to carry a gun. They went to the fight, and on the way out, Tupac got drawn into a fight with several people. Somebody had seemed engineered to make what happened later make sense. Because then they got in the car, and everything about that car ride made it seem like it was a U.S. intelligence planned procession to Tupac's death. He was in the car with Suge Knight, who was the big player in the story, who was probably an operative for U.S. intelligence the whole time, and they made Tupac drive. They didn't have bodyguards in the car like he always had. So he drove away, and later when they stopped at a stoplight with someone in an entourage to his left and a bunch of pretty girls pulled up behind, and he was distracted by them. Just then, a white Cadillac pulled up and put 13 rounds into the car. None of them hitting Suge Knight, 2 of them hitting Tupac in the chest. There were bike cops right there. They did nothing to secure the scene. In fact, they chased the car down and made a run for it before they got everyone out on their hands, with their hands above their head, and then finally took Tupac to the hospital. Tupac spent 5 days on life support, but he never woke up again. And so that's how the murder of Tupac seems like one more U.S. intelligence assassination to take out people who are trying to make the world a better place. Tupac was a beautiful soul using his powers, and this is what it got him. Like I said, it's a terrible story.